This is not just a story about a battle. It's about what happens when a war is over, but the violence isn't. On April 16, 1746, on a bleak moor in the Scottish Highlands, two armies met. The battle itself was short, lasting less than an hour, but its consequences have lasted for centuries. This is the story of Culloden, and more importantly, the story of what came after. The date was April 16, 1746. The place was Drumacy Moor, a stretch of wet, uneven ground near Inverness, now known to history as Culloden. On one side stood the British government army, led by the Duke of Cumberland, son of King George II. They were well-fed, well-equipped, and well-rested. On the other side stood the Jacobite army, a force of Scottish Highlanders, Lowlanders, and a few French and Irish allies. Their leader was Charles Edward Stuart, known as Bonnie Prince Charlie. His goal was to reclaim the British throne for his father, James Stuart. The Jacobite cause was complex. It wasn't just a simple case of Scotland versus England. It was a civil war. Families were split. Neighbors chose opposing sides. Some fought for the Stuarts out of genuine loyalty, believing them to be the rightful kings. Others fought for clan obligation, or for the promise of French support, or in opposition to the 1707 Act of Union that had joined Scotland and England into Great Britain. For many Highlanders, it was a fight to preserve a way of life that was already under threat. The night before the battle tells you everything you need to know about the two armies. The British soldiers slept soundly, their bellies full. The Jacobites, however, had attempted a surprise night march on Cumberland's camp. The march was a disaster. In the dark, on difficult terrain, the columns became separated. They were exhausted, starving, and demoralized. By the time they limped back to Culloden Moor in the early morning, they were in no condition to fight a pitched battle. But Charles, against the advice of his more experienced commanders, insisted. He believed a single heroic Highland charge could still win the day. And men were scattered across the moor, searching for scraps of food, many of them sleeping from exhaustion. They were unprepared when the alarm was finally raised. The government troops were advancing. The Jacobites were growing weaker with every mile. The stage was set not just by the men, but by the land and the weather. The ground at Culloden was completely unsuitable for the Highlanders' primary tactic, the charge. The moor was boggy, uneven, and cut by stone walls. It would break up the momentum of any infantry advance. As the armies faced each other, a cold, driving rain began to fall, mixed with sleet, blowing directly into the faces of the Jacobites. This wasn't a clash of equals. It was a collision of two different worlds. The British Army was a modern, disciplined force. They fought in lines, with coordinated volleys of musket fire and drilled bayonet techniques. The Jacobite army, while containing some regular soldiers, relied heavily on the clan system. Their strength was the ferocity of the Highland charge, a terrifying tactic that had worked in previous battles. But here, on this ground, in this weather, it was a recipe for disaster. The rain soaked the ground. Muskets misfired. Orders were confused. The battle began with an artillery duel. The British cannons were superior, professionally served, and tore horrific gaps in the Jacobite lines. For nearly half an hour, the Highlanders were forced to stand and endure this bombardment, waiting for an order that was slow to come. The ground around them became a killing field before they had even moved. Frustration and rage mounted. Finally, on the right flank, the clans could wait no longer. They charged. They ran into a storm of lead. The British infantry had been trained specifically to counter the Highland charge. Instead of firing at the man directly in front of them, each soldier was instructed to fire at the Highlander to his right. This bypassed the small shield, the targe, that the charging clansman carried, and hit his exposed side. The charge faltered. It broke. On the left flank, the MacDonalds, who felt slighted by their position in the battle line, charged late and were also cut down. It was a slaughter. A brutal, efficient, an horrifying demonstration of modern warfare. In less than an hour, the Jacobite army was shattered. Over 1,000 were dead on the field. The dream of a Stuart restoration died with them, but the killing wasn't over. In fact, for the people of the Highlands, the real horror began after the last shot was fired. This is what makes Culloden different. It wasn't the battle. It happened after. The order was given by the Duke of Cumberland himself. It was simple, no quarter. This meant no mercy, no prisoners. The wounded were hunted down. Those who had managed to crawl away from the battlefield were found in nearby barns and huts where they were seeking shelter. The buildings were set on fire. The men inside burned alive, or they were dragged out and shot or killed with bayonets. For days after the battle, government patrols swept the countryside, searching for any fugitives. The official reports call this pacification. The reality was systematic murder. This wasn't the spontaneous brutality of soldiers drunk on victory. This was policy. The government in London wanted to ensure that another Jacobite rising would be impossible. They weren't just trying to defeat an army. They were trying to crush a culture they saw as rebellious and savage. The message was clear. Any support for the Stuart cause would be met with overwhelming, terrifying force. Homes burned. Livestock were driven off or slaughtered. Food stores were destroyed. The Highlands were plunged into a state of man-made famine and terror. This wasn't about justice. It was about making an example. Fear was the point. And then came the laws. With the military victory secured, the government turned to legal and cultural warfare. The Act of Proscription of 1746 was designed to dismantle the very fabric of Highland society. They dismantled the culture. The act banned the wearing of Highland dress. Tartan banned. Bagpipes banned. The instrument was reclassified as an instrument of war. The Gaelic language was suppressed. The laws struck at the heart of clan identity. The hereditary power of the clan chiefs was broken, their authority transferred to the central government. The old bonds of loyalty and kinship were deliberately severed. People were forced to swear an oath to the government, an oath many found humiliating. Those who clung to the old ways did so quietly. The Highlands were changed forever. The vibrant martial culture that had defined the region for centuries was effectively outlawed, forced into the shadows, or romanticized into a safe, tourist-friendly caricature. What the cannons and muskets started on the battlefield, the Parliament in London finished with ink and paper. Today, if you visit Culloden Moor, it's quiet. The ground is preserved by the National Trust for Scotland. There are simple clan stones marking the mass graves where the Jacobite dead were buried. You can walk the lines where the armies stood. It's a peaceful, even beautiful place, especially on a summer's day. It's calm now. You can hear the wind in the grass, but it's a heavy silence. A silence filled with the memory of what happened here, and what happened after. It feels too calm. The battle ended in an hour, but the echoes of that day, the deliberate destruction of a people's way of life, reverberate still. It reminds us that some wounds are so deep, they become part of the landscape itself. Some battles never really end.